In today's video, we have 4 stories from No Sleep. From a story of an overtime shift that went horribly wrong, to a story of a man who got locked in a fallout shelter. This video has some truly eerie and unsettling stories. A huge thank you to the writers for allowing me to share these stories. Their links can be found in the description. Remember, you can send in your own story to rylhstories@gmail.com. If you enjoy the video, please be sure to drop a like and comment. Subscribing if you're new is also very much appreciated. Enjoy the video, and as always, I hope you all have a great night. This story took place in a small town in northern New York State. I was working at a small insurance company at the brink of going bankrupt. It was a few years ago, during early fall, in September. The wind was whistling and howling, a faint noise in the background. I was irritated and wanted to go home. Just wanted to get the work done and leave. That night it was a normal day at the office. I was working overtime to finish up a few projects my boss had piled onto my desk. I yawned and checked my watch. It was almost 1 a.m. and I had almost finished my last report when I heard a loud thud. I waited a minute, trying to hear a car drive off, but surprisingly nothing happened. It was silence. Pure silence. After about 2 minutes of silence, I began to hear something. It seemed to be the sound of someone walking slowly on the office's disgusting, dirty carpet. At the time, I did not believe in what many call monsters, so I continued to type, thinking it was a coworker. The sound got louder, and louder, and louder, until the sound was practically right behind the door to the computer room. Then the doorknob began to rattle. "Hey, wait a minute, I'm coming," I yelled. I looked under the door and saw that the feet were massive, absurdly large. The skin was wrinkled as if it was incredibly old, and a foul-smelling, thick, transparent liquid slowly dripped from them. Twisted, bent nails protruded from the feet, looking like nails were jammed into each toe. I got out of my seat and looked frantically for a place to hide. There was nothing that would keep me protected for long. Luckily, there was another door that led into a hallway. The doorknob began to rattle faster and more violently. Quickly, I ran over to the door and bolted into the hallway. While I was running down the hallway, I could hear the thing trying to break the door down. In a panic, I ran into the bathroom. Luckily for me, it was a single toilet bathroom, rather than a bathroom filled with stalls. After making it into the bathroom, I locked the door and sat on the floor, trying not to cry. After a short while of sitting in the bathroom and hearing the sound of wood cracking, I heard the shatter. The sound of a horrible scream from that thing could be heard through the whole building. I could hear the quiet sound of it moving down the hallway, like it was stalking something. Stalking me. The footsteps got louder and louder until the sound stopped, right by the bathroom door. "Please," I quietly whispered to myself, shaking in terror. I should never have said a word. The thing began violently thrashing against the door. I started to cry. I didn't know what to do. At the time, I thought it was the end. I was afraid of what my eyes might see when the door finally gives in. With a loud smash, the door came flying off and splintered against the wall. Then I saw the beast. It had no eyes, a crocodile-like mouth, teeth like those of a piranha, distorted arms so long that they touched its feet, legs so long and skinny. It's a miracle they didn't snap like twigs, and small, deep holes at each side of the head that were probably its ears. When I first saw the creature, I was terrified. It had to bend over to fit inside the 15-foot-tall bathroom. The skin appeared to be covered in a slimy and wet substance, but yet the skin was somehow wrinkly. I thought for a moment, fight or flight? Definitely flight. I tried to stand up, but I was petrified by the sheer monstrosity that stood before me. It was standing still, as if it was waiting for something. After a minute of silence with the beast in the room, it just left. Before I did anything, I waited for my heart rate to go down. After processing all of what had just happened, I came to the conclusion that that thing cannot see, but that it can hear. I knew that my chances of survival would be greater if I tried to escape, so I began my journey to the exit. After getting up off the frigid ceramic tile bathroom floor, I peered around the corner into the computer room. Nothing. After listening for anything for about 3 minutes, I left the bathroom and snuck into the computer room. I could see the exit. The exit was at the other side of the room. I began slowly moving towards it. Then I heard something. It was the creature, coming down the hallway into the computer room. The creature entered the room, bumping its head on the doorway, almost bringing down the door frame. The wood from the destroyed door crunched as it walked in. My heart began racing. Stupidly, I hid under the desk. The chair happened to slightly nudge the desk, making a quiet bump. The creature grunted. I could hear it quietly walking towards where I was hiding. The walking became slightly louder. I could see the creature's large, abnormal feet. It stopped moving. Then it started to lift up the desk. For having such long, skinny arms, the thing was surprisingly powerful. It dropped the desk to the left of where I was sitting. The creature started to bend over, and adjusted its ears so it was right next to me. It got so close to my face that I could smell the rotting flesh from inside its mouth. I held my breath, and tried not to run and scream. Suddenly I heard a crack by the doorway. I glanced over. A piece of wood from the door was still clinging onto the doorway. The wood began to bend, snapping and cracking, until it gave way. The piece of wood hit the floor with a loud wham. The sound was so loud that it rang in my ears. The creature's head turned to face the doorway. The thing began to lumber towards the door. I waited for it to be out of my sight before I did anything. Once that thing was gone, I counted to 5, and then I got up and tiptoed over to the exit. As soon as I was at it, I opened the door and bolted to the parking lot, slamming the massive metal door behind me. I didn't stop running. My hands were shaking so much and slippery with sweat that I could barely unlock my car. I got in and began to drive off. I glanced into the rearview mirror, and I saw the thing standing through the window of the exit. That was the last time I saw the monster. I didn't stop at my house to pack up my belongings. After quitting my job at the insurance company, I fled all the way to an airport and booked an immediate flight to Europe, as far from that thing as I could go. I didn't want to ever see that thing ever again. After arriving in Europe, I got another office job, this time in London. This time I decided to never work overtime alone. Sometimes I hear quiet footsteps outside my bedroom door, but whenever I get up to check what it is, nothing is there. I used to be able to drift back to sleep knowing that my sleep paralysis was a normal thing for some people, until the night my grandpa died. I lived with my grandfather since I was a child, and he basically raised me. His house was old and worn down. It was built even before he was born, so as a kid I was always afraid of being haunted. But nothing out of the ordinary ever occurred. The house had a dark and gloomy feel to it, but I had gotten used to it over time. Since my grandfather was very old-fashioned, I grew up without the use of video games or television, so all I had was an old wooden chessboard to play with Grandpa. He was a master chess player, and he taught me everything he knew. It took me years before I could finally beat him, and I can only recall the one time doing so. Sleeping disorders ran in the family, so insomnia would keep us up late at night, playing chess in the dimly lit bedroom where we kept the chessboard. As I got older and became more independent, I hadn't spent as much time with him. I was too worried about the girls I was with, or hanging out with friends away from the house. But I still came home every night to all the lights being on in the house, and Grandpa wide awake no matter how late it was. As time went on, my grandfather became very ill. He smoked most of his life and didn't quit until his late 50s. The doctor told him he had COPD, and I knew from that moment on I had to stay home more often to take care of him. Some nights I would wake up to the sound of him coughing, and I would get ready to spring out of bed and come to his aid. But my sleep paralysis would set in, and I wouldn't be able to help him, and I felt terrible for it. The cough became progressively worse, and in the mornings I would find blood on his pillow. I knew he didn't have much time left. One night I was startled out of my sleep after I heard him gasp for breath and then immediately hit the hardwood floor. I did everything in my power to jump out of bed to help him, but the paralysis kept me from moving even a finger. I had to wait minutes until I could finally move, and I rushed to his bedroom to find him cold and still. I immediately called 911 and performed CPR to the best of my knowledge, but I was too late. That night was the night my grandpa died, and I was at peace knowing he was no longer in pain, and I thought that would be the end of it all. I couldn't sleep very well the next few nights, just knowing that he was gone. Nothing felt right anymore. To me, it was like losing my dad. He was all I knew. It took a week before I could finally get a normal night's sleep, but I was so exhausted I needed it. I finally drifted off into what seemed like a full night's sleep. I was pulled out of my sleep to what appeared to be the sunrise, but as I attempted to lift half of one eye, I realized it was the hallway light still on. I know I had shut that light off before I went to bed. I have an OCD about shutting off every light and locking every door before I can even think about sleep. I wanted to get out of bed and shut it off, but I was locked in place. The sleep paralysis was so constricting, and I never knew how long it would last. I looked to my right and realized that wasn't the only light that was on. The dim bedroom light above the chessboard was on as well. This made absolutely no sense. I know I wouldn't have even attempted to fall asleep knowing that light was on. I had to focus on something to snap me out of this paralyzed state, so I stared at the chessboard. It was covered in dust, and hadn't been used for months towards the end of Grandpa's illness. I could barely see the pieces. The light was so faint. I laid there, tethered to my bed by my own body, as one of the pawns moved forward. My whole body flushed with anxiety, and a tear ran down my cheek. I couldn't tell if I was dreaming, or if this was actually happening, but I was terrified. I laid there wondering if it was my grandfather's spirit, trying to communicate with me. I felt the bed sink in beside my feet, as if something had sat down at the edge of my bed. I tried to move my foot out of fear, but nothing was responding. I couldn't do anything but close my eyes, so I closed them as tight as I could, until I could feel myself move again. Minutes passed, which felt like hours of pure terror, and I eventually could move my hand, so I quickly opened my eyes and all the lights were off, and I realized I may have just been dreaming all along. The exhaustion must have just been playing tricks on my mind, and I felt so much relief that I drifted back to sleep with no problem. Finally, the sun had rose, and I realized it was already past noon. I threw on a shirt and decided to head out for breakfast. I grabbed my keys and started to head out the door, when I realized I had forgotten my wallet. I walked back in the bedroom to grab it from my nightstand, and happened to glance over at the chess table. The pawn was still moved. It wasn't a dream after all. Is my grandfather haunting the room I sleep in? I'm not sure if I really want to know the answer. I'm still not sure how it happened. It was a muddy March day about a year ago when I received a strange robocall. If you are fortunate enough to have access to a fallout shelter, it is strongly recommended that you head inside immediately. If you don't have access to a fallout shelter, your basement is a much less attractive alternative. You have an estimated time of about 30 minutes before your area is completely irradiated. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed as many belongings as I could, things I thought I couldn't live without. Food, water, clothes, electronic devices that I'd be able to amuse myself with until the sun burned out. These were the essentials in my mind. Even though my shelter would be stocked with food and water already, I figured it never hurt to have more. Batteries, I couldn't forget batteries. Batteries were the heart and soul of my life. Without them, I'd rather die. As I was about to head out to the backyard, my phone rang again. If you have family members, friends, it would be appropriate to allow these individuals to avail themselves of your fallout shelter. I'm about to die. Stop calling me. I yelled into the phone. I suppose I was a little angry too. I felt mocked. It was probably an irrational feeling, but I wondered if the robocall knew I didn't have very many people in my life. Both my grandparents had died about 6 months before, and none of my family lived in this backwater town anymore. I truly was all alone. Well, I had one friend. His name was Sean, but he lived on the other end of town. I didn't have enough time to get him. Did having that thought make me a bad friend? I mean, it would have been a futile effort by the time I got there. We'd both be piles of ash. Getting into my car now wouldn't be an act of kindness, but stupidity. I liked Sean. We used to play video games for hours and talk about life, and the latest street drug he made all of his own. A cool, non-judgmental guy, but certainly not worth my life. Especially considering no matter what I did, he was a dead man. I locked the large steel door of the fallout shelter with a passcode. No entry, no exits. Unless for some reason I wished to commit suicide by stepping outside. I was safe. I breathed a sigh of relief and looked around at my new surroundings. My new home for eternity. "Hello?" I said. It was a stupid thing to say. I had the whole shelter to myself, but I had to say something. Anything to break the crushing solitude. The living room was furnished with a small white couch, a lamp in the corner, and a nice big screen TV. The place started to creep me out since the only light source came from the flashlight in my hand. I went over and switched on the lamp. Light gobbled up the darkness, and I felt safe again. Safe and content. I proceeded to set up the things that would keep me sane the longest. My Sega Genesis, an awesome gaming system in my opinion. Nintendo junkies wouldn't agree with me, of course. "You can't play Mario on that," Sean would say. Good old Sean. He could always be counted on for heated gaming conversations. "Now you're just ashes," I said to the gloom, and I felt vaguely suicidal in that moment. Not sure what to live for except the various gaming things I had brought with me to occupy my mind. I'm really screwed. I knew I had to distract myself. I had to take my mind off the fact that the world ended. So I turned on my Sega Genesis, then rifled through the box of cartridges I had brought with me. I needed something that was appropriate for the situation, but would help me ignore the devastation around me. The game Ghosts of Toxic City stood out. Sean had given it to me for my birthday, and he could never answer why none of our friends had that game. Man, I really used to love playing GOTC. It was frustrating too because I kept hearing about a secret level that I could never access. 300 hours logged into that game trying to find Cecil's Swamp. I remember finding some secret passages in the xXKikitoXx building, but they just led to small rooms with a couple of power-ups. I perked up after that. At least I had a goal. It might take me to the end of my days to find that level, but it'd be something my sanity could cling to as I frittered away the hours that would eventually turn into years. I put in the cartridge, and watched the intro screen pop up. There were various starting points, each with a different character, and different advantages. I chose Rex. He was my favorite character because of his weird diving outfit, with the massive helmet, and ectoplasm machine gun. He had a great starting advantage, since the xXKikitoXx building was filled with the ghosts of those who had died in the nuclear winter, so the xXKikitoXx building was the first level, and the most boring. Another reason I liked Rex, with him as your character, you could clear the level in about half an hour, without using any of your extra lives. He was also useful in the irradiated sea towards the end of the game. Days went by. Everything was pretty great. I was immersed in the game, having an awesome time chugging Mountain Dew and searching for that blasted secret level. Cecil's Swamp proved to be elusive. Nothing had changed in that department, and at one point I became so mad I threw the controller down. "Screw it," I said. "I really need a break." The clock read 8 p.m. I knew the stars were out, and that was enough for me. I'd unwind before bed. That was the night I started to see strange things. Things from the game. I shot up in my car bed, hearing the eerie sound of a Geiger encounter. What was that sound? I asked the darkness. even though I knew full well what the sound was. I almost swallowed my tongue when I saw the first ghost. It looked like something you'd see if you were wearing night vision goggles. They were green and grainy, but everything around them seemed normal. Normal, cold, dark steel. The sound of the Geiger counter got louder, and one of the ghosts walked closer. Stretching and instinctively, I grabbed the anti-ectoplasm gun from my nightstand. I fired a string of small shiny bullets at the grainy ghost. It disappeared with a haunting scream. I stood up and wiped my eyes. A cross-legged ghost appeared next, giving a low moan. "Stop looking for Cecil's swamp," it said. "Stay away." I fired the gun at the ghost. It glowed a bright white, but just absorbed the anti-ectoplasm bullets. "You should have tried to save me," the ghost went on. "Coward." The last word was something that Sean would totally say. He'd insult me all the time, calling me a loser and stupid. Coward was pretty mild compared to the usual stuff. Maybe that's why I didn't feel much guilt about not going to rescue Sean. The cross-legged ghost disappeared, and I realized I had to leave the shelter. I was wearing Rex's diving outfit after all. If this game was slowly becoming reality, I'd take advantage of any glitch in its programming. I went to the keypad next to the large steel door and pressed in the passcode. A beeping sound indicated I had done something wrong. I heard more moaning. Another ghost. The Geiger counter noise rose to such a level that it hurt my ears. I turned around and fired at the stretching green specter, and then turned my attention back to the keypad. I must have tried entering that passcode 10 times, only to suffer that beeping sound again. Frustrated, I took my anti-ectoplasm gun and fired it at the keypad. Sparks of electricity flew like popcorn, and the door swung open. Outside, everything was normal. No apocalypse, no ruined houses or piles of ash, which were once people. I took off my helmet and breathed in the slightly off-smelling night air. Something didn't make sense. If there wasn't an apocalypse, then why did Sean's ghost call me a coward? And what about the game bleeding its way into reality? Losing my mind seemed too easy an explanation. I looked around, seeing green. Humanoid shapes moved behind the shelter and among the trees. My phone rang, and I didn't bother to answer. Maybe once I repaired the keypad in the fallout shelter, I'd lock myself back in again, just to see what would happen. After months of planning and stress, my fiancé Liam and I have finally moved into our new home. We chose to build instead of buying an existing house, and I can honestly say it's been one of the most painful, yet fulfilling experiences of our lives. There are, of course, a few small things that we're not so happy with, but I guess it was always bound to happen that way. I'm 18 weeks pregnant at the moment, and we're looking forward to starting a family, or at least we were. The first few days after moving in were great. We built in a new development and were lucky, or unlucky, enough to be one of the first houses completed in the area, so all around us is basically just a construction zone. We haven't gotten any fences up yet, because they were an unexpected expense we didn't really consider. But since we've got no neighbors and it's a safe neighborhood, we've also not been prioritizing it either. At this point, I should mention that the area behind our house is actually completely undeveloped. Instead, it's just some gently sloping grassy hills that eventually lead into an expanse of forest. I believe that particular section is going to end up being a nature reserve and a playground at some points later on. Part of why we chose this piece of land was because we saw in the master plan that there's going to be a playground where those hills are, and because it was slightly cheaper than the rest. Still though, we thought it'd be a great idea for our kids to play out there, and we'd be able to watch them from the comfort of our own home. To the right of us, there's a house being constructed. It's just a concrete slab that's been laid at the moment, but I'm not thrilled for the construction noises that'll come with it once it gets underway. To our left though is more undeveloped land. The new roads there are in, but so far either no one has bought those pieces of land, or they've simply not started building. I don't really know for sure. Either way, since we don't actually have curtains yet, it makes for a nice view at least. We do plan to get curtains soon. It's slightly unnerving being the only house out here with no fences and no curtains for privacy, especially at nights, which was something we had discovered on our first night here. But we had been in a rush to move in because our lease was up and we didn't want to end up homeless or anything. And we also didn't consider that we needed curtains, or doorstops for that matter. Small things you don't realize you need when you're looking over the building contract, I guess. Anyway, on the day that we first moved in, we had just finished moving all of our furniture as it started to get dark and, naturally, we had turned on the lights for the first time only to see our reflection staring back at us. That in itself was a little startling initially, but worse still was that we realized that while we couldn't see out because of the glare, that would mean that anyone at all would be able to see into our house with absolute clarity while we had the lights on. To fix this issue, we put up blankets over the windows in the rooms that we're active in, and settled for just closing the doors on rooms we weren't currently using, as we were running out of blankets and that seemed to suffice for the time being. Now Liam only got a couple of days off work while we moved, so it was largely left up to me to unpack, a process which was slow in my current state. And since it was December when we moved in, the days were short and night fell quickly. I had been unpacking in the kitchen, with the blanket over the window lifted so that I could work in the natural light before it got too dark, and only stopped unpacking to start cooking dinner. I didn't even realize that I had left the makeshift curtain open until I caught sight of myself in the reflection. That alone gave me a near heart attack, but I laughed it off. It was so silly of me to be frightened, and I decided that there really wasn't any urgency to shut it, especially since I was hands deep in meat cutting up small chunks for a nice stew, so I figured it could wait. However, barely 10 minutes passed before I was beginning to feel more and more uneasy. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something could be watching me from the darkness while I was completely unaware, and so I stopped what I was doing, washed my hands, and went to pull the blanket back over the window. After doing so, I felt a little on edge, but it at least made the unease I felt bearable until Liam got home. He laughed when I told him how silly I'd been in managing to spook myself, but still dutifully took a look out of the window for me. For reasons I can't really explain, it made me nervous to watch him standing there half behind the blanket with his hands cupped around his face to better see out. He looked around for some time before he uttered the words, "Oh my God," quietly to himself, and I instantly felt my blood run cold. "What is it?" I managed to choke out, with every horrifying possibility of what he was seeing running through my head. Was there a person? Some supernatural being? Or perhaps some mysterious wild animal? I thought. But as he turned to me with the biggest grin I'd ever seen and said, "We've got so much landscaping to do out there," I just wanted to hit him. I was genuinely terrified while he was making jokes. Really. I gave him my best sneer, and set his plate down with attitude on the table, all the while muttering about him being ungrateful, and not at all funny as I did. I refused to admit that his annoying humor at the time had made me feel considerably better. I knew if I did that it'd go straight to his head, and I was seriously beginning to feel like I was just being moody. After all, nothing had really happened. It wasn't until 2 nights later, while my husband and I had been sleeping, that I had awakened to a faint, rhythmic sound. Unsure of what it was at first, I laid in bed and listened. Tap, tap, tap. I bolted upright. I wanted to convince myself that it was just the wind, but it was so powerful, and besides that, there weren't any trees, shrubs, or grasses around our newly built home for the wind to have even been able to blow onto our windows. I was frozen, absolutely motionless, as the sound progressed from the tapping to an uncomfortable scraping. It took all the willpower I had to force my arm to move so that I could shake Liam. I desperately wanted him to wake, but he wouldn't. I couldn't speak, and he simply rolled over, brushing my hand off as he did. Then, just like that, the sound was gone. No more scraping or tapping. No sound of footsteps or of anything at all. I remained awake for the rest of the night, still unable to move, but nothing more happened. I began to think that maybe I'd just imagined the whole thing. Because of this, I didn't mention anything to Liam as he left for work. However, as soon as he was gone, I was quick to go outside and investigate our bedroom window. I began by examining the area around. There weren't any footprints in the dirt, and nothing seemed disturbed. But it was impossible not to notice the scratches on the window. As I looked at the scratches more closely, I tried to explain them in a more rational way. Perhaps the window had been scratched at some point during the construction process, and we just hadn't noticed when we'd done our final walkthrough. That seemed like a good explanation, and I liked it better than jumping to some other random conclusion, so I resolved that I would ask Liam about it when he came home. I was filled with renewed confidence in my reasoning, and went about the rest of the day as normal. At lunchtime, Liam called me from work, thanked me for his lunch, and then proceeded to inform me that he was going to have to stay back late. Almost immediately upon hearing his words, I felt the unease from the night before return. Still, though, I told him it was fine. It was his work after all, and that I would wait up for him. He tried to insist that I didn't have to, but I don't think I would have been able to sleep anyway, so I just dismissed him. Knowing I would be alone for a while, I made sure to cover all the windows well before dark, and kept only the TV on for comfort, and everything seemed to go well for a while. I was halfway through a typical late-night crime show when I heard a sound from outside. I hesitated, pausing the TV and listening intently. I was glad I had managed to pause it on a darker scene, so if there was someone out there trying to peek through the gaps, they'd have trouble seeing much into the house. I then had the idea to turn on the outside lights only. That way I'd be able to see if anyone was out there, while they'd only be able to see the glare on the windows, since it was dark outside. I thought it was brilliant. I crept over to the light switch for the backlights, and flicked it on. I then moved to cautiously look past the blanket out the window. It was a small miracle that I'd even managed to flick the right switch, on the first try, and the switch was right by the window, so I didn't actually have to move to look out just in case anyone was wondering. Anyway, when I looked out I saw nothing. Clearly I was just being paranoid by now, and shaking my head at my own insanity. I moved to turn the light back off. Unfortunately, this time I flicked the wrong switch, and the inside light came on. I didn't think much of it. It was a mild inconvenience, sure, but I just readjusted my fingers to get the right switch. However, in the moment between turning off the outside lights and turning the inside light on, I caught a glimpse of my reflection. Something was standing behind me, inside my house. I screamed and turned the light back on so fast I could have put strobe lights to shame. But when I turned back to look, there was nothing there. With shaking hands, I grabbed my phone to call Liam. He didn't answer, though it was only a second or two later that I heard his keys rattle in the lock, and he came into the house. I practically threw myself into his arms, crying and sobbing as I hysterically tried to explain what had just happened. I was inconsolable and incoherent, so I'm not surprised he didn't understand what I was trying to say. He managed to calm me down after a few minutes, and suggested that we go to bed. He thought I was just tired and hormonal, or that I had fallen asleep and dreamt the whole thing while I was waiting for him to come home. I know I didn't. I know I was awake, and not impaired in any way. I'm pregnant, not stupid. We fought, and my anger burned away the fear enough to allow me to sleep. When morning came, I was awoken by an apologetic fiancé, and breakfast in bed. He still didn't believe me, of course, but he felt like he owed me for being unsupportive the night before. I forgave him, and more coherently explained my ordeal, as he listened properly this time. We decided that he'd call in sick to work, so that we could wait to see if anything would happen when he was home, and if anything weird happened, we would leave. Suffice to say, I'm writing this from a hotel several blocks away from our house. As darkness fell that night, nothing happened. I began to doubt myself as we uneventfully ate dinner and watched TV in the dark. When it was time to go to bed, Liam came up with the idea that we could scatter baby toys over the floor in the hallway, so we would hear if anything was there. I think he was trying to humor me, but I liked the idea. We had friends who were a little overeager, and had bought us way too many toys in anticipation. and it just happened that a lot of the toys we'd received had bells, or played music when squeezed, and whatnot, which would make them the ideal alarm system. So we went to bed with toys laid out all over the hallway floor, and our bedroom door shut. I fell asleep pretty easily. Apparently I was tired, and with Liam there to comfort me, I felt safe with the precautions we'd taken. However, it was just after midnight when I was nudged awake. Groggy and annoyed, I asked, "What? Can you hear that?" Liam whispered. His voice had a nervous tone to it that made me very instantly awake. I listened for a long moment and heard nothing, but it was as I was just about to speak again that I heard the faintest tinkle of a bell. It sounded like someone had either just brushed a bell as they stepped past it, or that they'd picked up the toy really slowly, trying not to make any noise. I huddled back against Liam and could tell that he was extremely tense. His dad reflexes kicking in early, I'm sure, as we waited in the thick silence to hear another sound. A few moments passed before we heard the bell jingle again. This was enough for Liam to reach into his bedside drawer looking for our handgun. I heard him load it quietly, but I still felt absolute terror at the sound of a toy suddenly beginning to play music right outside our bedroom door. "I'm armed," Liam shouted in the meanest, most protective voice I have ever heard. It was like hearing the difference between a dog barking normally and hearing a dog bark because there's actually something there. In response to his shouting, our bedroom door suddenly slammed open with enough force that the wooden door frame splintered as the hinges broke. I screamed as Liam fired the gun twice, and in the light of the muzzle flashes I saw something. I don't know what it was. It was like a tall black mass reaching for us, and I scrambled to turn on the light. By the time I got the light on, whatever it was gone, leaving behind only a set of charred footprints outside our bedroom door, and a trail of destroyed baby toys. We didn't wait until morning to leave. We packed the car with our essentials and left immediately. There was no way that we were going to take the chance that we'd made this thing mad, and that it would come back. Liam believes me now, and I don't know what we're going to do about our house. We've discussed whether or not we should have someone bless the house or something, but neither of us are really religious, so we doubt that would work. We've seen too many people get scammed like that. We're both really tired right now, so we're going to try and sleep for a bit. Maybe we'll decide what to do in the morning.